they don't announce it as official policy. So they didn't ask us to promote their, let's say, extremist attitude of their institutions. But that happens, in reality that happens, whether through indirect support of their government or through the foundation from the institution and the personnel. So this is part of the problem. But when I want to talk as government, I have to talk about the announced policy. The announced policy is like any other policy, that it's about interests, it's about playing a role. But we cannot ignore what you mentioned. It is.
Iran, which is a very close ally, also exposed to economic sanctions, also facing a threat of military invasion. If you were faced with an option, cut ties with Iran in exchange of peace in your country, would you go for it?
There's no contradiction. I don't have this contradicting option. Why? Because we had good relation with Iran since '79 till today, and it's getting better every day. But at the same time, we are moving toward the peace, and we had peace process, we had peace negotiations. Iran wasn't a factor against peace. So this is misinformation they try to promote in the West, that if we need peace, we don't have to have good relation with Iran. There's no relation. It's completely two different subjects. Iran supported Syria, supported our cause, the cause of the occupied land, and we have to support them in their cause. That's very simple. Iran is a very important country in the region. If we are looking for stability, we need good relation with Iran. You cannot talk about stability while you have bad relation with Iran, with Turkey, with your neighbors, and so on. This is it.
Do you have any information that the Western intelligence are financing rebel fighters here in Syria?
No, so far what we know that they are offering the knowledge support of the terrorists through Turkey, sometimes in Lebanon, mainly. But we have the other intelligence, not the Western, in the region. Some of them are very active, more active than the Western, under the supervision of the Western intelligence.
What's the role of Al-Qaeda in Syria at this point? Are they controlling any of the rebel coalition forces?
No, I don't think they're looking to control. They look to have their own, let's say, kingdom or emirat in their language. But mainly now they try to scare the people through explosion, assassination, suicide bombers, things like this, to push the people toward desperation and to accept them as a reality. So they go step by step. But their final aim is to have this, let's say, Islamic emirate in Syria, where they can promote their own ideology in the rest of the world.
From those who are fighting you and those who are against you, who would you talk to?
We talk to anyone who has genuine will to help Syria, but we don't waste our time with anyone who wants to use our crisis for his own personal interest.
You know, you've been many times, not you, but the government forces have many times been accused of war crimes against their own civilians. Do you accept that the government forces have committed war crimes against their own civilians?
We are fighting terrorism. We are implementing our constitution by protecting the Syrian people. Let's go back to what happened in Russia more than a decade ago. You faced the terrorism in Chechen and other places. They attack people in theaters, schools, and so on. And the army in Russia protected the people. Would you call it war crime? No, you wouldn't. A few days ago, Amnesty International recognized the crime that was committed a few days ago when they captured soldiers and executed them. And the Human Rights Watch recognized more than once about the crimes of those terrorist groups, and it was described a few days ago as war crime. This is the first point. The second point, if you have army that committed crime against its people, this is devoid of logic, because the Syrian army is made up of Syrian people. If you want to commit crime against your people, the army will divide, will disintegrate. So you cannot have strong army, unified army, while you're killing your people. Third, the army cannot withstand for 20 months in these difficult circumstances without having the embrace of the public in Syria. So how could you have this embracement while you're killing your people? This is contradiction. So this is the answer.
When is the last time you've spoken to a Western leader?
Before the crisis.
It was before the crisis.
Before the crisis.
Were there any time at which they tried to give you conditions that if you left the post of presidency, then there will be peace in Syria, or no?
No, with me directly, no. But whether they propose that directly or indirectly, it's a matter of sovereignty. Only the Syrian people will talk about this. Whoever talk about this in the media, in a statement, directly or indirectly, has no meaning and has no weight in Syria. So, no.
But, you know, do you even have a choice? Because from what it seems from the outside, even if you wanted to go, you wouldn't have anywhere to go.
Exactly.
Where would you go if you wanted to leave?
To Syria. I would go from Syria to Syria. This is the only place where we can live. I'm not puppet. I wasn't made by the West to go to the West or to any other country. I'm Syrian. I'm made in Syria, and I have to live in Syria and die in Syria.
Do you think that at this point there could be talks or diplomacy, or we've reached a stage where only the army can do the thing?
I always believe in diplomacy. I always believe, and I always believe in dialogue, even with people who doesn't understand, who doesn't believe in dialogue. You have to keep trying. Whether you succeeded or not, I think you always have partial success. You have to look for this partial success before you achieve the complete success. But you have to be realistic. You don't think that only dialogue can make you achieve something, because those people who commit these acts, there are two kinds. One of them doesn't believe in dialogue, especially the extremists. And you have the outlaws who have been convicted by the court years ago, before the crisis. And their natural enemy is the government, because they're going to be detained if you had a normal situation, let's say. The other part of them is the people who is being supplied by the outside. And they can only be committed to the people or to the governments who pay them the money and supply them with armament. They don't have choice, they don't have decision, they don't own their own decision. So you have to be realistic. And you have the third part of the people, whether he's militants or politicians, who can accept the dialogue. That's why we've been in this dialogue for a month now, even with militants. And many of them give up their armaments and they went back to their normal life.
Do you think a foreign invasion is imminent?
I think the price of this invasion, if it's happened, is going too big, more than the whole world can afford. Because if you have problem in Syria, and we are this last stronghold of secularism and stability in the region, and coexistence, let's say, it will have a domino effect that will affect the world from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And you know the implication of on the rest of the world. I don't think the West is going in that regard. But if they do so, nobody can tell what's next.
Mr. President, do you blame yourself for anything?
Normally, you have to find mistakes. You do it with every decision. Otherwise, you're not a human.
What's your biggest mistake?
I don't remember, to be frank, now. But I always, even before taking the decision, I have to consider that part of it will be wrong. But you cannot tell about your mistake now. Sometimes, especially during crisis, you don't see what's right and wrong until you overcome the situation that you are in. So I wouldn't be objective to talk about mistakes now, because you're still in the middle of the
So you don't have regrets yet?
Not now, as it. When everything is clear, you can talk about your mistake. But you definitely have mistakes. That's no.
If today was 15th of March 2011, that's when the protests started to escalate and grow, what would you do differently?
What I would do what I did.
Exactly
the 15th of March, exactly the same. To ask the different parties to have dialogue and to stand against the terrorists. Because that's how it started. It didn't start as marches. The umbrella was marches, but within those marches you had militants who started shooting the civilians and the army at the same time. Maybe on the tactical level you could have done something different, but as president you're not tactical. You always take the decision on strategic level, which is different.
President Al-Assad, how do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
In 10 years, through my country, I cannot see myself. I can see my country in 10 years' time. This is where I can see myself. More
do you see yourself in Syria?
Definitely. I have to be in Syria. It's not about the position. I don't see myself whether president or not. That's not my interest. I could see myself in this country, safe country, stable country, more prosperous country.
President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, thank you for talking to our team.
Thank you for coming to Syria again.